The envelope was already open when Maren found it. She stood in the kitchen of her grandmother's house, the one on Calloway Street in Roanoke, Virginia, holding a rectangle of cream-colored paper that had been slit along the top with something sharp, a letter opener or a thumbnail, the cut so clean it must have been done deliberately, carefully, by someone who knew exactly what was inside and chose to open it anyway. The kitchen smelled of old wood and dried lavender, the way it always had. Outside, November rain moved against the window in slow, diagonal lines. The envelope was addressed to a woman named Vera Lund Calloway. The return address said only Nils P. Halloway, Roanoke, Virginia, and beneath that, a date typed in faded black ink. September 14th, 1943. Maren turned the envelope over. The wax seal on the back had been cracked, not sliced, cracked, as though pressed open by something blunt. And inside the envelope there was nothing. Whatever letter Nils P. Halloway had written to Vera Lund Calloway in September of 1943 had been removed, taken, kept somewhere else. And the empty envelope had been tucked between two cookbooks on the kitchen shelf, where it had presumably waited, undisturbed, for decades. Maren set it on the counter. She put the kettle on, and she told herself she would think about something else. She did not think about something else. This is a story about what happens when a family buries one of its branches so completely that the people descended from it no longer know their own name. And it is, underneath that, a story about two young men who were born into the same blood and sent into two different wars and came home as different people, one of them still carrying the name he was born with, and one of them carrying a name he chose the way a man chooses a coat in a hurry, in the dark, in the cold, without knowing how long he would have to wear it. Their descendants grew up as strangers, and Maren Calloway, standing in her grandmother's kitchen in November with an empty envelope and the sound of rain on glass, was about to begin pulling the first thread loose. She was 31 years old. She had driven 6 hours from Baltimore with 2 cardboard boxes, a suitcase, and a grief she had not yet learned to carry steadily. Her grandmother, Edith Calloway, the woman who had lived in this house for 53 years, who had kept lavender in every room, who had never once mentioned a man named Nils Halloway in Maren's presence or in anyone else's, had died 3 weeks earlier. Not suddenly. The way old age comes when it is expected and still arrives like something unexpected. Maren was the one who had come to sort through what remained. The house would be sold in spring. There were boxes to fill and decisions to make. But it was the envelope that stopped her, the way a splinter stops you. Not with pain exactly, with something more like the sudden awareness that something is lodged where it should not be. She stood at the counter while the kettle heated and she turned the envelope over again. Vera Lund Calloway. That was her grandmother's name. Edith's mother, Maren's great-grandmother. Vera, who had died in 1971, before Maren was born, before Maren's mother was old enough to remember much about her. Vera, who appeared in exactly 2 photographs in this house. One as a young woman in a light-colored dress, standing in front of something that might have been a barn, and one as an older woman at a table set for Thanksgiving, looking slightly away from the camera, as though she had been caught mid-thought. Maren did not know who Nils P. Halloway was. She had never heard the name. She poured her tea. She carried the envelope to the dining room table where she had already begun spreading documents, her grandmother Edith's papers, the deed to the house, insurance folders, old utility bills. She set the envelope among them, and she began, methodically, the way she did most things, to look for its meaning. The rain continued against the glass. November light flattened everything to gray. It took her 2 hours to find the first connection, and she almost missed it. She had been going through a manila folder labeled in Edith's careful handwriting, Family Misc. A folder that contained, in no particular order, a baptismal certificate, a newspaper clipping about a church raffle from 1958, a photograph of someone's first car, and a single index card on which Edith had written in pencil a short column of names and dates. At the top of the column, in slightly darker pencil as though it had been pressed harder, was the name Halloway. Below it, in lighter strokes, Nils P. Halloway, born March 3, 1901, Roanoke, Virginia. Then enlisted U.S. Army 1918. Then a gap. Then returned 1919. Then M. And here the pencil had stopped, and what followed was a smear, as though Edith had written a name and then erased it. Below the smear, removed from family records, 1943. Maren set the index card down. She picked it up again. She read the phrase a second time. Removed from family records, 1943. People are not removed from family records the way a subscription is canceled. They are removed because someone decided that their presence in the record, their name, their history, their claim on the people before and after them, was dangerous, or shameful, or both. She wrote the date in her notebook. September 1943, the envelope, the empty letter, the erased name. And then she noticed what she had not noticed when she first read the index card. Below Nils's entry, separated by a thin penciled line, was a second name. Einar Halloway, born June 17, 1903, Roanoke, Virginia. Then enlisted U.S. Navy, 1942. Then presumed missing in action, 1944. And below that, in letters so small, Maren had to lean close to the lamp to read them. Survived. Different name. Do not search. Do not search. Maren sat very still. The tea had gone cold. Outside, the rain had become heavier, and she could hear it on the roof now, a low, steady percussion. The clock on the mantel ticked. She was aware of the house around her in a new way. Aware of its walls holding decades of silence, aware of Edith's presence in the furniture, the dishes, the folded dish towels by the sink, and aware, too, of something in the house that Edith had never spoken, a shape of silence that had always been there, and that Maren had simply taken to be the ordinary quiet of an old woman living alone. Nils Halloway, Einar Halloway, two brothers, born 2 years apart in the same city. Nils went to the First World War and came back. Einar went to the Second and was listed as missing, and then survived under a different name, removed from family records, 1943. Do not search. What happened between those two instructions? What happened in September of 1943 that caused a family to cut loose two branches at once, to erase the name of a living man and warn themselves away from finding a missing one? Maren pulled her laptop from her bag. She opened it. She began. The genealogical trail of the Halloway family was not, at first, difficult to find. The name itself was an anglicized variant. She found this in census records and ship manifests within the first 40 minutes. The original name had been Halvorsen, Norwegian. The family had come over in the 1880s, settled first in Minnesota, then drifted south and east over 2 decades, the way immigrant families sometimes did, following work and weather and the rumors of better ground. By 1900, there was a Per Halvorsen listed in Roanoke County, Virginia, occupation listed as carpenter. By 1910, he had changed the name. The census shows him as Per Halloway, age 41, wife Astrid, age 36, children Nils, age 9, and Einar, age 7. Per Halloway, Astrid Halloway, 2 boys growing up in Roanoke in the first decade of the 20th century, sons of a man who had already once changed his name, who already knew what it meant to shed an identity and step into a new one. The 1918 draft registration shows Nils Halloway, age 17, enlisting in the Army. He was, according to the registration card, 5 feet 9 inches tall, brown hair, occupation listed as laborer. The physical description is brief and impersonal, the way military records always are. They record the body, not the person inside it. He came home in 1919. The city directories for Roanoke show him living with his parents through the early 1920s, then in a boarding house by 1925, then at a different address by 1928. His brother Einar appears in the same directories, working first in a hardware store, then at a mill. The two brothers' addresses are different, but they are in the same part of the city. They are not far from each other. And then, in the 1930 census, Nils Halloway disappears from his household entry. He is not listed in Roanoke. He is not listed anywhere in Virginia. But Einar is still there. Maren found this gap at midnight. She had been working for 4 hours and her neck ached, and the rain had finally stopped, leaving a deep quiet over the neighborhood. She poured herself a glass of water and stood at the sink, looking out at the wet, dark street. And she thought about what it means for a person to simply not appear in a census. It can mean many things. Death, relocation, an enumerator who missed a household. Or it can mean that a person had, for reasons of their own, made themselves difficult to find. She went back to the laptop. She searched for Nils Halloway in other states through the 1930s. Nothing. She searched for variants. Nils Halloway, Nils Halloway, Nils Halverson, even Nils Hall. And then, on impulse, she searched for Nils P. Halloway in Virginia death records. He died in Roanoke in 1968. Cause of death, heart failure. He was 67 years old. His death certificate listed his next of kin as Vera Lund Calloway, described as his sister. Maren read the word again. Sister. She set the glass down slowly. She looked at the envelope on the table. Vera Lund Calloway, Nils P. Halloway. The letter he had written to her in September of 1943. The letter that had been removed from its envelope and hidden somewhere, or destroyed, before anyone else could read it. If Nils was Vera's brother, then Vera was the sister of both Nils and Einar. She was the third sibling, the one who stayed, the one who kept the empty envelope for 25 years until she died in 1971, and then passed it somehow, through the house and its accumulated silence, into the possession of her daughter, Edith, who kept it tucked between 2 cookbooks for another 45 years, and who wrote on an index card the 4 words that were now sitting in the center of Maren's attention, like a stone dropped in still water. Do not search. Edith was Vera's daughter, Maren's grandmother, the woman who had lived in this house, who had slept in these rooms, who had known, she must have known, that her mother had received a letter from a brother who had been erased from family records, and that somewhere in the world, or beneath it, there had been another brother who had survived a war under a name that was not his own, and Edith had kept the empty envelope. She had not thrown it away, she had not searched, but she had kept it, as though she were leaving a door ajar that she herself did not have the courage or the permission to walk through. The next morning, Maren drove to the Roanoke Public Library. She was there when it opened, in the genealogical research room, where a woman named Phyllis, who wore reading glasses on a beaded chain, helped her navigate the local newspaper archives without once asking why. The Roanoke Times archive ran from 1890 onward on microfilm. Maren began in 1941 and moved forward slowly, scanning headlines, scanning social columns, scanning the thin columns of names that newspapers of that era printed in small type: the engaged, the married, the inducted, the deceased. The light from the microfilm reader made her eyes ache. She found Einar Halloway's name in a Navy departure notice from April of 1942, listed among young men from Roanoke County who had enlisted in the preceding weeks. His name was spelled correctly. He was 19. No, she corrected herself. He would have been 38 years old by then, not 19. Men his age were not boys going to war. They were men with lives already built, going to war. She moved the film forward. 1943. She scanned August, scanned September, and she was about to advance to October when she saw it. A short notice in the social column. the kind of brief, formal item that papers of that era used to communicate what the community needed to know without saying more than was necessary. It read, "The Halloway family of South Roanoke regrets to announce the cessation of all correspondence and acquaintance with Mr. Nils P. Halloway, formerly of this city, effective immediately. Family members request that his name not be raised in their presence. No further statement will be issued. September 18th, 1943, 4 days after the date on the envelope." Maren sat back from the microfilm reader. Phyllis glanced over from her desk, then looked away again with the tact of a woman who has spent years watching people make discoveries in archives. The cessation of all correspondence, a formal public notice, placed in the newspaper to announce that a man had been cut from his family. These notices appeared occasionally in the early and mid-20th century. They were sometimes used in cases of legal disputes, sometimes in cases of moral transgressions, sometimes in cases that mixed the two in ways that no one wanted to explain in print. They carried the weight of a social verdict. Once your family ran such a notice, the community understood that your name was not to be spoken at their table. But Vera had kept the envelope. Vera, who was Nils's sister and Einar's sister, who had received this letter 4 days before the notice ran, who had opened it carefully and removed the letter within and kept the envelope empty on her shelf. Vera had complied publicly with the family's decision and privately kept the only physical evidence that her brother had tried to reach her. What had been in that letter? What had Nils written on September 14, 1943, that was so dangerous it had to be removed from its envelope before anyone else could find it? Maren photographed the notice with her phone. She thanked Phyllis. She drove back to Calloway Street in the gray morning light, and she sat at the dining room table and looked at the envelope again, and she thought, "You didn't just leave this for me. You left it for someone. You left it because you knew that eventually someone would need to look." She went through the rest of the house. It took the whole of the day. She worked room by room, methodically, as she had been trained by temperament and by years of working as an archivist for a university library in Baltimore. She understood boxes. She understood the logic of what people keep and where they keep it. She understood that the things people most want to hide are rarely hidden cleverly. They are hidden with urgency, stuffed behind or beneath more ordinary things, and left there until urgency becomes habit, becomes permanence. In the bedroom closet, she found a hat box. Inside the hat box, beneath 2 felt hats that had not been worn in decades, she found a bundle of letters tied with kitchen twine. The letters were in envelopes, and the envelopes were addressed, all of them, to Edith Calloway. The return addresses were different. Different cities, different states, different decades. But the handwriting on all of them was the same. A woman's handwriting. Careful, small, forward-leaning. The earliest letter was postmarked Asheville, North Carolina, 1951. The latest was postmarked Charleston, South Carolina, 1979. There were 11 letters in total. Maren untied the twine and opened the earliest one. It was 2 pages, handwritten, the paper now soft and faintly brown at the edges. The salutation was, "My dear Edith," and below that, "I know your mother has asked that we not write to one another. I am writing anyway because I think you deserve to know that your uncle is alive, and that he is well, and that he thinks of your family often, though he understands he cannot say so publicly. His name now is Edward Holt. He lives quietly. He asked me to tell you only that he is grateful for the years he had before the war, and that he carries the memory of your mother's laugh like a light in a coat pocket. Your uncle's wife, Clara Holt." Maren put the letter down on the table very carefully, the way you put down something that might break. Einar Halloway had not simply taken a new name. He had built a new life, a complete one, with a wife named Clara, and presumably a home and neighbors, and a history that no one around him would have known was not the whole truth. And his wife Clara had written, in 1951 to his niece Edith, secretly, against the instruction of Edith's mother Vera, but with the deliberateness of someone who believed that silence, taken too far, becomes its own kind of wound. She carries the memory of your mother's laugh like a light in a coat pocket. Maren read all 11 letters that evening. She made tea twice. She ate nothing. She read them slowly, the way they deserved to be read, not scanning for information, but receiving them the way they were intended, as transmissions from the far edge of a family's erasure sent across decades, keeping a thread alive that everyone had agreed to cut. Clara Holt had been a careful writer. Each letter was brief, affectionate, precise. Each one reported on Edward, which was how she always referred to her husband, never Einar, as though she too had learned to inhabit the new name completely, with the economy of someone accustomed to communicating across a silence they both understood might be permanent. He is well. He is working. He is content, mostly. He has some trouble with his right knee from the cold. He does not speak of the war. He sends love without asking for anything in return. The fourth letter from 1957 mentioned a son. Our son Thomas was born in March. He is healthy and very loud. Edward held him the first morning and did not say anything for a long time. When I asked him what he was thinking, he said he was thinking about his brother. I did not ask which one. 2 brothers, Nils and Einar. Both erased from the family record in different ways, in different years. Nils cut out publicly, by notice in the paper, in 1943. Einar dissolved privately, by the simple fact of never coming home under his own name. What had connected them? What had happened that year, that month in September 1943, that had caused both men to be severed from their origin at once? The answer came not from the letters, but from a document Maren found the following morning, tucked inside the back cover of a Bible that had been sitting on the nightstand in Edith's bedroom. The nightstand where Edith had presumably set her glasses down and turned off the light for 53 years. The document was a single sheet of typed paper, folded into thirds, slightly yellowed, with a crease that had been opened and refolded so many times. The paper was soft as cloth along the fold lines. It was a letter, not handwritten, typed on a typewriter with a slightly uneven key strike. The capital letters sitting fractionally higher than the lowercase, the way certain manual typewriters wore after years of use. And at the top of the page where a name should have appeared, there was nothing, no salutation. Just the body of the letter, beginning mid-thought as though the opening had been torn away. The text read, "And I have told him plainly that what he did cannot be undone, and that the Army's position on the matter is final. The investigation into the supply contracts will proceed regardless of his cooperation. If Nils chooses to cooperate with the inquiry, he may face a reduced sentence. If he chooses to protect the other parties involved, he will face the full weight of the charges. I have no personal interest in the outcome. I am writing only because Mother asked me to inform the family before the newspapers do. The shame of it will not fall on Vera or on the children. That I can promise. But the name must be cut. There is no other way to protect what remains." The letter ended there, at the bottom of the page, the second page presumably lost or destroyed long ago. Maren sat on the edge of Edith's bed with the document in her hands. November light came through the thin curtains. The room smelled faintly of talcum powder and the lavender sachets Edith had kept in every drawer. A supply contracts investigation. World War II era, 1943. She understood now, with the clarity that comes when enough scattered pieces are held up to the same light, the shape of what had happened. Nils Halloway, who had come back from the First World War in 1919 and spent the 1920s moving through addresses and occupations, had at some point in the late 1930s or early 1940s become involved in something that intersected with military supply chains. Contracts, materials, the kind of work that during wartime could make a man wealthy quickly and could also, If the wrong connections were made or the wrong corners cut, become a criminal matter with the speed of a turned tide. The Army had investigated. The family had received warning through an intermediary, a sibling perhaps or a cousin, someone with enough standing to send a typed letter, before the newspapers reported it. And Vera, who had already received Nils's letter on September 14th, asking her, perhaps, for help, or for understanding, or simply for the acknowledgement that she still knew him, Vera had opened that letter and read it and kept the envelope and then complied with the family's decision 4 days later, because complying was the only way to protect her daughter and her household from what was coming. Nils Halloway was investigated for wartime supply fraud. The family cut him to save themselves. And in the same year, Einar Halloway, listed as missing in action in the Pacific Theater in 1944, had survived, but had returned at some point after the war's end, not as Einar Halloway, but as Edward Holt. The question that opened like a second door in Maren's mind was this: had Einar chosen a new name because of his brother's scandal, or had something happened to him in the war, in the water, in the years between 1944 and wherever he resurfaced, that made the old name feel like a coat belonging to someone he no longer was? She did not know yet. But she had a name now: Edward Holt. A son named Thomas, born March 1957. Last known location, from Clara's 1979 letter, Charleston, South Carolina. She opened her laptop. Thomas Holt, born approximately March 1957, Charleston, South Carolina. She began with public records, birth certificates, which South Carolina had digitized for the post-1950 period. She found a Thomas Edward Holt, born March 12, 1957, parents listed as Edward James Holt and Clara May Holt, née Warren. The record was genuine and complete and ordinary, the record of a life that began cleanly in a city that knew nothing of the name behind the name. Thomas Holt would be 67 years old now. Maren stared at this for a long moment. Then she did the thing that archivists are trained never to do without careful consideration, because once done, it cannot be undone, and because the people on the other side of a discovery like this have had no say in whether they wanted to be found. She searched for Thomas Edward Holt in current public records. He was in Charleston still. He had a listed address. He had, as far as she could determine from the layered accumulation of public-facing information, a life, a house, a profession listed in a business directory as retired, had been a marine biologist at the College of Charleston, and a family of his own. She found mention of a daughter in a 2019 alumni publication. Dr. Sarah Holt, marine science following in her father's footsteps. A daughter. Maren's age, approximately. Maren closed the laptop. She sat in the silence of Edith's house for a long time. The clock on the mantel ticked. The lavender sachets breathed their faint dry scent into the air. On the dining room table, the empty envelope from 1943 lay where she had left it, addressed to Vera Lund Calloway, bearing the name Nils P. Halloway in the return corner, slid open along the top. She thought about what it would mean to contact Thomas Holt, to contact his daughter Sarah, to say, "Your grandfather was born Einar Halloway in Roanoke, Virginia in 1903. His sister Vera kept an empty envelope for 25 years. Your grandmother Clara wrote letters to my grandmother Edith for 30 years in secret. You have a family you have never been told about, or perhaps you have been told only half of it, the half that could be shared without tearing something open." She thought about the phrase Edith had written on the index card, "Do not search." And she thought about the fact that Edith had kept the letters, all 11 of them, tied with kitchen twine, in a hat box, under felt hats, at the back of a closet. She had kept Clara's letters. She had read them. She had read about the boy Thomas born in March, and about Edward holding him and thinking about his brothers, and she had kept every word. Keeping is its own kind of searching. She made her decision without drama. She opened the laptop again, and she began to compose an email. but she stopped herself before writing a single sentence, because she realized she was missing something. She had the shape of Nils's story, the fraud investigation, the family's decision, the public notice. She had the shape of Einar's, the Navy, the war, the new name, the life rebuilt in South Carolina. But she did not know yet what had happened to Nils afterward. He had died in Roanoke in 1968. He had listed Vera as next of kin, which meant that despite the family's public cutting, despite the notice in the paper, Vera and Nils had maintained some form of contact. The empty envelope was the beginning, not the end, of their correspondence. She went back to the Roanoke records. Nils Halloway appeared in city directories sporadically through the 1950s and 1960s, listed at various addresses, occupation varying, laborer, handyman, maintenance worker. The records told the story of a man living at the edges, not destroyed, not imprisoned. She found no conviction record in the Virginia State Archives, which suggested the investigation had either not proceeded to charges or had resulted in something lesser than a felony conviction, but reduced, living in rented rooms, working with his hands, returning eventually to the city he had been born in and been cut from, as though the only place a person can truly disappear is the place that already knows the worst of them. He died in April of 1968 at Roanoke Memorial Hospital. The death certificate listed next of kin as Vera Lund Calloway, 44017 Calloway Street, Roanoke, Virginia. The address of this house, which meant that when Nils died, Vera had been notified, and perhaps she had been the one to authorize the arrangements. And she had done all of this without ever telling her daughter Edith, or at least without telling Edith in any way that was preserved, because Edith had written on her index card the note about Nils and followed it with the date he was erased from the family record, not the date he died. Maren searched one more thing. She searched for obituaries for Nils P. Halloway in the Roanoke Times archive, April 1968. She found it on a Thursday edition. 3 sentences. Nils P. Halloway, 67, died April 9th at Roanoke Memorial Hospital. He was a long-time resident of Roanoke County. He is survived by his sister, Mrs. Vera Lund Calloway, of this city. 3 sentences, the length of a man who had been erased. But his sister was named, publicly, in print. 25 years after the family had run a notice cutting him away, Vera had allowed herself to be named as his surviving family. She had not hidden it. She had not asked the paper to omit her. She had let the record show what the record showed, that she was his sister, that she had survived him, that the line between them had not been cut as cleanly as the family had publicly declared. Maren sat for a very long time with this. Then she thought about something she had not thought about yet, which was the date of the empty envelope. September 14th, 1943. The investigation was presumably underway or about to become public. Nils was writing to his sister. He was writing before the newspaper notice, before the family's official declaration, while there was still a chance, or maybe while he already knew there was no chance and was writing anyway, the way people write when they need the words to exist somewhere even if they cannot be kept. And Vera had opened it, and read it, and removed the letter, and kept the envelope. The letter was somewhere. Letters like that don't get destroyed. They get hidden more carefully than other things. Maren understood this with the certainty of someone who has spent years in archives, who has learned that the documents people most wanted erased are the ones most fiercely preserved. She went back through the house. It took her until nearly 11 at night. She went through every drawer, every box, every shelf. She found the expected accumulation of a long domestic life. Rubber bands and expired coupons and birthday cards and receipts for appliances long since replaced. She found a small leather photograph album that she had not opened before, and she took it to the dining room table and went through it slowly. The photographs were labeled in Vera's handwriting. She recognized it now from the envelope. Each photograph had a name and a date in the white border. Christmas 1938, The children, Easter 1946. And then, near the back of the album, a photograph with no label at all. Two men, young, standing in front of a house she did not recognize. The taller one had his hands in his trouser pockets and was looking directly at the camera with an expression that was not quite a smile. More like the face of someone who has agreed to be photographed, but retains some private reservation about it. The shorter one had turned slightly sideways and was laughing at something outside the frame. On the back of the photograph, in faint pencil that had almost faded entirely, Nils and Einar, summer 1940. 3 years before the erasure, 3 years before Einar would enlist, 4 years before he would be listed as missing. The two men are young, middle-aged by the standards of that era, but in the photograph they carry a lightness that middle age sometimes allows before it withdraws it. Nils with his hands in his pockets and his private reservations. Einar laughing at something the camera cannot see. Maren set the photograph on the table next to the envelope. She looked at them together. Then she found the letter. It was inside the leather photograph album itself, tucked into the spine, folded twice, so thin that she had not felt it when she first held the album. She had found it only because she had bent the album back slightly to look at the photograph on the last page, and felt a slight resistance, and when she looked, she saw the edge of paper. She worked it free carefully, the way you work a splinter free. Slowly, without forcing it, respecting the decades it had spent in that particular resting place. It was 2 pages, handwritten. The handwriting was angular and deliberate, with the slight tremor in some letters that suggested a man writing under considerable pressure. The ink was faded, but legible. It began. Dear Vera, by the time you read this, you will have heard from someone else what is being said about me. I want you to hear from me first, though I understand if hearing from me first does not change what you must do. I am not writing to ask you to stand with me publicly. I know what that would cost you, and I would not ask it. I am writing only so that you will know what is true, regardless of what you are required to say. What is true is this. I made a mistake, and I made it knowingly, and I made it because I was desperate, and I thought it would not matter, and then it did matter, and by then I could not undo it. I am not asking for absolution. I am asking only that you keep, somewhere in yourself, the knowledge that I was your brother before I was anything else, and that I loved our family even when I was doing the thing that made me unworthy of it. Tell Einar, if he can be told where he is, that I am sorry I have made the name harder for him to carry. That was not my intention. The name was already hard enough. I do not expect to hear back from you. I am not asking for that. I am asking only that you read this and fold it away and know that I existed and that I loved you. Your brother, Nils, September 14th, 1943. Maren read the letter twice. Then she folded it along its original folds and held it in both hands for a moment before setting it on the table. Tell Einar, if he can be told where he is, that I am sorry I have made the name harder for him to carry. Einar had already enlisted by September 1943. He was already in the Pacific. He was already somewhere that letters might not reach him, or might reach him delayed, or might reach him and be read in the kind of circumstances that make everything from home feel both close and impossibly far. Nils knew this. He wrote the sentence anyway. He asked his sister to carry the message to a brother who was beyond easy reach, in the same breath as he asked her to fold his letter away and keep it in silence. And she had. She had done exactly both things. She had folded the letter into the spine of a photograph album where she kept the last photograph of both her brothers together. And she had, through whatever means she had, through Clara's letters perhaps, or through some other channel, ensured that the message reached Einar or his family eventually. Because Clara's letter in 1957 had said, "He does not speak of the war. He sends love without asking for anything in return." He knew. Einar knew what had happened to his brother's name. He had carried it, this added weight, the weight of the name being harder, through his own transformation, his own renaming, his own reemergence into peacetime as a different man in a different city. He had carried his brother's shame folded into the decision to become someone new. And perhaps that had made the decision easier, or perhaps it had made it heavier. Perhaps both. Maren sat at the table with the letter, the envelope, the photograph, and all of Clara's letters spread around her, and she felt, not for the first time in this work, but with particular force at this moment, the weight of what it means to carry other people's silences without knowing you are carrying them. She had grown up in a family shaped by two absences she did not know were absences. Two brothers, two names, two wars, two different kinds of disappearance, one chosen and one forced, both of them flowing downstream into the ordinary life of a grandmother who kept lavender in every room and tucked her grief into hat boxes and between cookbooks and inside the spines of photograph albums. Edith had known. Edith had received Clara's letters for 30 years. Edith had written on an index card the names and dates, including the 4 words at the bottom. Do not search. She had written it, perhaps, as an instruction to herself. A reminder. A restraint she imposed on her own curiosity because she understood, or thought she understood, that some silences had been chosen by people with more information than she had, and that respecting a silence is sometimes the only form of love available to you. But she had not destroyed the letters. She had not destroyed the envelope. She had not destroyed the index card. Maren thought about this for a long time. Then she opened her laptop and she composed the email. She wrote it the way she would have wanted someone to write it to her, carefully, without urgency, with every claim sourced to a document she could name. She told Thomas Holt that she had found letters among her grandmother's effects, letters written by a woman named Clara Holt to a woman named Edith Calloway. She told him that she believed Clara had been his mother and Edith his great-aunt, connected by a thread of correspondence kept secret for 30 years. She told him that she had also found a letter, dated September 1943, from a man named Nils Halloway, and a photograph of 2 brothers in a summer yard. And she told him that she was not writing to demand anything or disturb anything, but that she thought he deserved to know these things existed if he did not.